static site generation with React and Gatsby. My name is Scott. Just briefly, I've been in the software industry about 17 years. I figured it out, and I've worked in a lot of languages, anywhere from classic ASP to .NET to Java, and now React and such. And I think that's an interesting perspective I can bring to the table. But yeah, I do contracts. I'm an independent consultant, and so I can do training and software development. So come talk to me after if you're interested in hearing more. Right, so let's just jump right into it. So we're here to talk about a technology called Gatsby. So I'm going to show you just briefly what Gatsby can do for you. So what I've done is I've used the global install of a node module there, just Gatsby, and given it the develop command. And it has a server running locally that I can hit. So let's go there. And what you can see is this is my blog. If you've been to blog.scottnonnenberg.com, you probably have seen this. So that's kind of fun, right? Let's take a look at how that is generated. So here's the project. I've got all my posts there, all in Markdown. And you can see I have some front matter there that's pretty standard if you've ever used a static generation tool that uses Markdown. There's some configuration that's required for Gatsby. It looks at your project and demands a central configuration, and it demands that your pages are under pages. And then there's some interesting magic with templates. The underscore template is a reserved word which allows you to build the structure around your page. If you ever used React Router, it has this concept of kind of cascading components that each contain each other, and it uses that system to build your blog. So this is my index page. You can see that I'm showing some HTML previews here, and then when we get a little further down, they become just text previews, and you can see we're just using HTML preview, text preview, and then just the link here, and then we're printing them out. So the great thing about this is we're using React, the thing that we're very comfortable with, maybe using it for your day job, maybe just hobbyist with it today. But you can use it for something like your blog, which I really like because I don't want to have to go learn something else for my blog system. So what does Gatsby give us beyond just using React as our kind of fundamental system? Well, you might have guessed this already, but there we go. That is hot reload, Webpack hot reload, which means that I can change my React components and the structure of my website on the fly. How many people have used Webpack hot reload for their React stuff? Yeah, so it's pretty great. It's particularly useful when you're just hacking around on your blog. So I like that feature. But the thing that really sold this system for me was when I'm editing my posts. So let's just go to this. So R for React. I like React, so I wrote a blog post about it. So I can change the posts. So let's say, hello there. I like to put that W in there for some reason. And there it is. And the great thing about this is that it is exactly how it's going to appear in production. Most systems that allow you to write blog posts have some sort of preview. And this is exactly how it's going to look in production. No worry about how the styles are going to apply, how it's going to be transformed when you go to final production. So I really like that aspect of it. So that is the development experience with Gatsby, and just type Gatsby develop in your project. Plain Markdown files. It looks the same as production while you're working on it, and you get the hot reloads. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So that's a good starting point. So now I want to talk a little bit about my history with blogging. So I mentioned that I've been in the tech industry for 17 years. I've actually been blogging for 19 years, or about 19 years since I was first on the web. And so let's take it all the way back to 1997. So I was hand editing in Notepad. Anybody do this? Notepad.exe in Windows, hand editing HTML. Yes. Awesome. Awesome. All right. And yeah, obviously my data and my markup is mixed because I don't have any data anywhere else. These are just files on disk. But the great thing was it was the exact same thing as production. When I double click on that HTML file, that's what it's going to look like. So let's take a look at a 1999 era proto blog just really quick. I want to prove to you that I was doing this. and I still have the files, which is pretty cool. So huge stuff. I'm in my dorm room. Yeah, so this is 1999. And the great thing is, like, the files are still here, and I can just pull this up and view it. Isn't that amazing that the browsers still render this, right? And even more interesting is I got a little fancy with some of my early web page stuff. And this is like my avant-garde homepage, right? And you can hover over each of these things, the various parts of my site, right? But even cooler, so this is JavaScript in 1999. You can reshuffle, and we can turn all of them on and off, and you can save it in your cookie. It's pretty exciting stuff. And I obnoxious about cookies. Like when you first came to the page, it would pop up a little dialogue like, this is your first time here, right? Because you don't have a cookie. In any case, the key is that is the way that it looked in production, the way that it's looking on my local machine. It looked that way when I FTP'd it up. This is before rsync. It's before SFTP. This was straight FTP. So fast forwarding now to 2004, I joined Microsoft right out of school, and I was on the MSDN blogs. And there was a system that they encouraged us all to use, blogs.msdn.com. It was an ASP.NET site with a database behind it, and it had a really lame little preview, had a little text box you could type into, format it a little bit, and definitely there's no customization on this thing. And as you can see, what's amazing about this is still available online right now. Like if you search for my name and Microsoft, this was like the second result. I'm surprised they haven't taken it down yet, but they take permalinks seriously, I guess. But yeah, this is straight from the early 2000s. And so yeah, that was my next stage of blogging. And I would call this the beginning of the dark era of like heavyweight, serious applications, databases, right? Because I'm lucky this thing is still up on the web. Otherwise, it would be lost forever. In 2013, after leaving Microsoft, starting my own company and such, I decided, hey, you know what? I want to get on the web again. And Tumblr was the thing. And it had a better editor, I'll say that, versus blogs.msdn.com. But again, the preview, like I don't want to have to edit, and then hit the preview button, go somewhere else, look at the preview, and then go back. And again, we're comparing this to Gatsby. Gatsby, you make the change on disk, and you see exactly what it's going to look like in production. I really enjoy that. And again, no customization with Tumblr. You can do themes, but it was very minimal. And as you might expect, I'm a developer. Like I can't deal with cloud services that don't give me enough flexibility. I need to be able to tweak. And so who has heard of Ghost? Anybody? Yeah, so Ghost is a Node.js-based blogging platform. It uses Markdown for editing as well as a database. And it has this nice little kind of real-time editor on the left side, and then it'll show you what HTML that produces. But the problem is, again, that still doesn't give you the theme. The theme you choose for Ghost is not shown when you're live editing your Markdown. So that was also something I needed to switch away from. So finally, here we come to 2016. I'll admit I went to the Ruby world a little bit here, and I took a detour into the world of Jekyll. And how many people have heard of Jekyll? Yeah, it's used for a lot of projects. GitHub is pushing it pretty substantially, but it uses Markdown files on disk, right? The nice thing is that because of the way that it's processing things, when you turn on the development mode for Jekyll, you see the same thing as production. But I have to be honest, I don't want to be writing any code in that world. Like, I didn't want to do it. I don't want to spend any time writing code that's not like in my preferred platform. And so React and Node, that's where I want to be. And that brings us to Gatsby. So it's Markdown files, it's the same thing as production, and it's very easy to customize. And I want to customize it. So the Gatsby experience is React again, so that's what I use when I'm developing web applications. That's pretty great. And this new world of like having all my Markdown files on disk, it's such power. I have my Markdown files in Git, which means I can track their history for a long time. You do not get that with anything like Tumblr or Ghost even. And then I can find all in posts. I can find some sort of link to something and change it if it needs to happen across all my posts. It's very easy. And I was even willing to do things like I wrote a little script that goes to my analytics provider, pulls down the data, and then updates in the front matter at the top of the file You can see that here, the rank. So what the popularity of my posts, like how popular is this based on a certain time frame on my analytics. So I was willing to do that because it was in a technology that I was familiar with. But it's funny, we're kind of full circle, right? We're going from hand editing back in the 90s to now we're hand editing text files again, but we have a little more comprehensive system. I'm not, when I want to change the format of my website, I don't have to change 60 files by hand, which I did when I was in high school. But yeah, so there's another command in Gatsby, which is Gatsby build. So when I take a look at the console, I wrote a little script. You can see build.sh, which cleans the directory first, but then does a git Gatsby build. And what that does is it takes your files, or your React router and your React components and your Markdown, and generates static files on disk. Right? So you get both that nice development experience and files on disk, which is a pretty nice combination. So what I'm going to do then is stop that dev server. You can see it was rebuilding the Webpack file. And I'm going to use the, this just is a small script that calls the Python simple server. And so now what I'm doing, instead of serving a development server, I'm just serving those files on disk. So when I go back to my page, and I previously generated this, but there it is. That's the page, and this is the static site. And so it looks exactly the same. That's why it's kind of an underwhelming demo, that part of it. And so that we'll head back to the content. So I have to say, I think static files are absolutely awesome. First of all, there's no server process to worry about, how much memory it's using, stopping it and restarting it when you deploy. You don't have any dependencies that could introduce vulnerabilities into your app, and you might have to update your app frequently because your dependencies need to be updated. And you don't have a database that you also have to update periodically and maintain. How big is it getting, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really easy to serve static files. You can send it to your favorite CDN. You can use GitHub Pages, or you can just serve it with straight Nginx. It's really easy once you have that zip file or tarball to files and send it wherever you need to go. So I really like the static files. I think that makes this system. So for a blog, yeah, like it makes sense to do that, right? It's only so many posts. It's not changing very often, right? Whenever you publish something new, that's when it changes. So it's a no-brainer for a blog. But here's a question. What about other site types? So for a documentation site, maybe, yeah, like you're providing documentation for a product that you produce. Sure, that could probably use a similar system since it's only changing, somewhat regularly. Marketing site for a company as well. Maybe it does change a couple times a day. That's just fine. You don't need to dynamically generate it. Yeah, static files. Like, let's do more static files. But what about like a shopping site? Is there any way we could do more static generation for a shopping site? Like this stereotypical thing is that has to be a full web app, and you have to generate that page on every request. Maybe some caching in there, sure. But what about a shopping website? Could we generate that thing? So this is an Etsy page, and what I've highlighted is all of the sections that are probably a little bit more dynamic. You have a sign-in and a cart on the top right. You have a few favorite locations. You can favorite the item. You can favorite the store. You have the number available. I mean, that's definitely very important. And then you have some social stuff. How many people have provided feedback? How many people have favorited it, right? So that stuff is definitely changing a little more often than you might want to handle with like regenerating your website and then redeploying static files. But we can still wonder if the database is required for all of it. And that's why we can ask a few questions like, are the users changing the data? And for the social stuff, yes, the users are changing the data. And if the users aren't changing the data, how fast is it changing? And if it's changing more than you'd want to deploy and rebuild your static site, then you'd probably want to throw dynamic access into a database. But which parts? Which parts actually need the dynamic? What if we had static files that were targeted with just little bits of JavaScript that hit an API and updated that part of the page? Interesting to think about. So let's get back to Gatsby. That was a digression. I indulged there a little bit, but let's talk about some facts about Gatsby. It was released last year by one Kyle A. Matthews, not me. I'm talking about it because I like it and I think it's worth using. I have PR'd a couple of times, and so I feel proud about contributing back to open source, but it is under active development. There was a version released a couple days ago. And the great thing is it's so easy to get these benefits. The static build, the Webpack, the very easy development, real-time updates. Install the global tool, use Gatsby new, the directory you want to create, and then that S, I didn't have enough room there, but there are a few starter projects. There's a website or a program documentation starter kit and a blog starter kit if you just want to get started and go. Once you have that, then you can get in that directory, type Gatsby develop, and you are off and running. You get what I just showed you. And then when you want to develop or create the static files, Gatsby build. There you go. So the high-level features are that hot reload via Webpack while you're doing your development. You build the static files. And then one that I didn't mention yet. You get a single-page web app for your program, for your site, once you have built the production version. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So we're on the page. I'm going to look at the network activity here. I'm going to refresh once so we can see that. And then when I navigate around, I'm trying to scroll to the bottom here so you can see it. There's no new web requests. So no matter where I go on the page, no new web requests. So that's kind of cool. That's kind of fancy, right? But I have to ask the question, do we want a single page web app? It's an interesting question, right? Like, it's fancy. It's kind of the cool thing, right? Let's actually first ask ourselves, why are people doing single page web apps to begin with, and what are they? Well, they are basically fooling your browser into thinking it's going to multiple pages, right? And it can be useful in some cases. It can definitely contribute to a perceived performance improvement in some scenarios. It can reduce the data you have to download for subsequent steps once the page is downloaded. And maybe you can even get full offline support like Google Mail, right? Gmail's app does a bunch of loading up front, and then it's fast and it just downloads the little bits of data it needs later. So that's why single page web apps. But I propose that we use a calculation, just like the database. Do we need a single page web app? Is it worthwhile using one? And so there are three things that I think we should think about when we're looking at whether we should use a single page web app. First, the initial download size. When the user first hits your website, how much data does it have to download? The next is per page download size. How many kilobytes are each successive link if you don't have a single page web app? And then what are the average number of pages hit per visit? And that can be a disheartening number, certainly. People leave immediately. So I'll tell you what it is for my blog. So first, it's 218K for the bundle.js, which is what Webpack produces. It's the whole single page web app after gzip. And that's pretty big, right? Does anybody think that's pretty big for a blog? Yeah.
Does that include the styles as well?
That does not include the styles. The styles are inline on the page right now. So the second number you see includes all the styles. But it does include React, which is about 40K minified. It includes, honestly, all my posts, actually, which at this point are about 152K zipped, the directory. So that's interesting. So that's going to account for a large amount of the bundle, right? 152K of just posts. And then another little bit of React Router, another little bit of Moment, and then a little bit of JavaScript, right? So 218K. And so here's the sad news. The sad news is that each page, which is fully ready for no JavaScript, is 8 to 14K gzipped, okay? And my average roughly is about 2.5 pages per visit. And that's like kind of rounding up because I know there are some bots hitting me, etc. Okay, so can anybody do the math? What do you think? Anybody? Anybody? No, nobody's gonna help me with this? The answer is it's totally not worth it because it's roughly about 15 page views required to justify that initial download. So that's interesting, isn't it? So there are some other things to think about beyond just the initial size and the page and then the number of actions in your session. The first is latency. So if you're on a high latency network, maybe you do have a huge amount of bandwidth. It's just really high latency. You download it all at once. Then you're good, right? No more need for like subsequent downloads. And in fact, if you're in a like a coffee shop and you have like that one moment where you first connect and things are working well, you could download the whole thing and you're good from then on, except for images. Mobile. So JavaScript perf, like you're downloading and unzipping, processing, parsing, and executing a huge amount of code, especially on like a little phone, right? So that's interesting. Maybe you don't want to do that. Something to think about. Another is if you frequently update your page, you probably want to set it up so you don't have to re-download that entire 218K every time. That's an engineering challenge, of course, but it's probably worthwhile. At least split out your dependencies like React. And then download speeds. So if your download speed is really slow, then yeah, like you probably want to do it a little bit at a time. And here's another idea. Maybe you optionally boot your single page web app depending on some metrics that you can detect, like how long it takes to download and start running your JavaScript, if it's a phone or not, right? Interesting. But I have to say, I think this is why React is so great, because it gives us the options to render at build time if we want, to render on demand on the server if we want, to render on demand in the client if we want there. And I think that's why it's worth thinking about Gatsby, because it will unlock that kind of potential for you. React is pretty powerful, but it does take a while to configure, and Gatsby will just get it going for you real quick. Any questions? Question?
So the single page setup as you've got it is more just how you've configured Gatsby, or is that
no by default? Yeah, it's a great question. So by default, Gatsby will give you a bundle.js in the file, and it will generate a bundle.js. So that's the default setup.
Right.
And my math seems to indicate that it's probably not worth it most of the time. But it's really easy to say, hey, I don't want to include that bundle.js, and I'll probably pull a request into the Gatsby project soon. An option should just say, don't even generate the bundle. Other question?
Yeah, so the reason that you have the start.sh is to clean the directory, and that's because Gatsby is kind of like a wrapper for Webpack. You can actually put in your own Webpack plugins to do that.
There are ways to kind of extend Webpack, certainly. The reason why I'm doing the build is first to clean the directory. I just want to do that manually, and then I'm checking to see if I have anything outstanding in Git, for example, and then I'm also pre-gzipping everything before I rsync it to my servers. Like there's a bunch of things I do in there. Yeah, but there are a number of ways to extend Gatsby. We can talk about that offline. Another question?
Another thing I'll throw out. I'm actually less familiar with Webpack. I'm used to using like Require.js,
right,
which can do has the ability to build really nicely layered builds to say, oh, here's the common module which is going to be used on every page in the site. Here for this subset of the site.
Yep.
And so you can basically use that to do the hierarchical minimization.
Right.
Is there any facility to do that in Webpack?
Yeah, there's actually some pretty intense stuff. Code splitting is the feature you're going to want to look for, like if you want to start doing this investigation. But there's also the ability to just give it arbitrary chunks of your site, a lot of different entry points, and it'll generate all the files that you want it to generate with the dependencies it finds from those endpoints. Right. There's like Webpack, you can just spend months learning it. So you can probably do anything you want, ever. Any other questions? Question?
Jekyll has different plugins. For example, for pagination and navigation for different posts, etc., like out of the box. Does the Gatsby have something similar?
Well, the great thing about using Gatsby, so the question is about Jekyll and Jekyll's plugins, that they're already ready for you, is you're in the world of React, right? And you can just download whatever component you want. And as long as it renders on the server properly, you're good. All right. Well, thank you for your time, everybody.